Hi Year 6, Mr Marshman here. I hope you're safe, I hope you're well, and I hope you're enjoying some of the challenges and tasks that your teachers are setting you. I thought I would take the opportunity to make a little video for you to have a look at a poem. And I went online and had a quick search for poems that have a kind of spring feel to them, because since we've been off, since we've been at home, the weather has been really kind of spring-like, and I thought it would be a really good thing to do to have a look at a poem, particularly kind of celebrates spring and creates a lot of spring images. So what I'm going to do is we're going to have a look at the poem. I'm going to read through the poem, and I'm just going to pose a couple of questions for you to help with your kind of thinking about the poem, and to really just kind of get you to think about how poets use language, how they use words, how they use different poetic techniques to create particular images and emotions. Okay, so let's have a look at the poem. Okay, so here's the poem. The poem is called The Enkindled Spring, and it's by a famous novelist and also poet, D.H. Lawrence. And we'll talk a little bit about D.H. Lawrence later, just to give you an idea of the poet and his life and where he's coming from. So here's the poem. This spring, as it comes, bursts up in bonfires green, wild puffing of emerald trees and flame-filled bushes. Thorn blossom lifting in wreaths of smoke between where the wood fumes up the watery flickering rushes. I am amazed at this spring, this conflagration of green fires lit on the soil of the earth, this blaze of growing and sparks that puff in wild gyration, faces of people streaming across my gaze. And I, what fountain of fire am I among this leaping combustion of spring? My spirit is tossed about like a shadow buffeting in the throng of flames, a shadow that's gone astray and is lost. Okay, so it's important to say that whenever you're studying poetry, whenever you're reading poetry, the first important thing to do is to read the poem through and to just have a think. Have a think about your initial response to the poem. How does it make you feel? What can you gauge from the poem? Is there a particular theme that runs through the poem? Now, obviously with this poem, the theme is spring, but there's also other themes, there's other messages, there's other metaphors that run throughout the poem. And it's really kind of interesting and really key to think about those themes and those messages that go through the poem. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the poem again, and I'm just going to point out and pick out a couple of things that we might not have understood the first time we read it, and then just again, as I said earlier, pose a couple of questions to really help you think about the poem and really help you think about what the poet was talking about. Okay. So here's the poem again, and what I want you to do is just have another look through, have another read through, and I want you to start thinking about the images that the poet is creating. How is he creating these images of spring? What metaphors is he using in order for us to picture the spring that he's describing? So I've got a couple of tasks that are going to help with our understanding of the poem. And the first task is a little bit of a dictionary task. So what I want you to do is I want you to look up the following words in a dictionary, or you can search for their meaning on Google. And I want you to write the word and then the definition next to that word. Okay, so write out the word and then the definition next to that word. So hopefully those definitions have helped a little bit with our understanding of the poem. So if you manage to find enkindle, so set something on fire, or arouse or inspire something, to set something on fire, the enkindled spring, so the spring that has been set on fire. You can see very much from that first line, this spring as it comes bursts up in bonfires green. So there's very much that kind of connection with fire, and kind of creating those metaphors of fire, and the spring images. Wild puffing of emerald trees, so emerald like jewels, like something that's precious, something like treasure. Flame-filled bushes, so the bushes aren't actually on fire, and that's where the metaphor comes from, the image comes from, that figurative meaning of fire. These bushes aren't actually filled with flame, but because the colour is coming to them, because the red leaves and the colour is coming to the bushes, that's how the poets decided to describe them. Thorn blossom lifting in wreaths of smoke between where the wood fumes up the watery flickering rushes. So again, these kind of spring plants, these spring bushes that we see, and using those kind of fire metaphors to create the images. I am amazed at this spring. So we get the kind of real personal insight to how the poet feels about spring. And here's our next word that we had to look up. This conflagration. So it's a really kind of destructive fire. And it seems so strange for the poet to use a word that has this connection with things that are destructive, that a fire that would destroy land, that would destroy kind of massive amounts of land. But this conflagration is of green fires lit on soil of the earth, this blaze of growing. So it's a blaze, but it's growing. And that's kind of really strange, isn't it? That normally when we think of fire, we think of things being destroyed, but actually this fire, this thing that is spreading, is actually spreading growth, is spreading new life. And sparks that puff in wild gyration. So gyration, this idea of something spiraling, something turning. Faces of people streaming across my gaze. Now, again, with poetry, we don't know all of the answers. All we can do is come up with ideas. So where are these faces? Who are these faces? Are they real people? Where is he seeing the faces? Is he seeing the faces in the plants? Is he seeing the faces in the trees, in the bushes? What are these faces? And then the final stanza, the final verse, again, a real personal impact of spring. And I, what fountains of fire am I among this leaping combustion of spring? So again, if you're not sure about the word combustion, you can always look it up in the dictionary, thinking about this kind of, again, this idea of fire. My spirit is tossed about like a shadow buffeted in a throng of flames. So a throng, it's like this big crowd of people are gathering. And here we've not got a gathering of people, but we've got a gathering of flames. And the fire of spring that he's talking about, that he's describing, is creating these shadows. And again, when you think about shadows, What does that make you think of? What are you thinking about when you're thinking about shadows? Is that something scary? Is that something that worries you because you can't see everything? What are these shadows that he's talking about? And then we finish off with this, a shadow that's gone astray. Sorry, my computer's gone. A shadow that's gone astray and is lost. So who's lost? Is the poet lost? Is the spring making him feel lost? Again, lots of things with poetry in particular where we have to ask questions in order to get some answers. Not necessarily the right answers, but it enables us to think. So if we start asking the right questions, we can start thinking more deeply about this poem. So I've got two more tasks for you to complete with regards to the poem. And the first one is to really start thinking about that imagery, those images that he creates, particularly in the beginning of the poem. And what I've written here is imagery. So imagery is language that creates images, often figuratively. So when we're talking about figurative language, we're talking about similes, metaphors, not something that's literal, but something that's representative. So something that shows us a different type of image. So what I want you to do is to draw two of the metaphors from the poem. Okay, I've picked out a selection, but if you want to, you can go back in the video to when the poem's on the screen. You can pause it, you can look at the poem again yourself, and you can pick out any images you like. And what I want you to try and do is really represent the metaphor in a drawing. So think about the two things that are being compared here and how you can kind of combine those two things together. So the first one on my list is bonfires green. So what are these green bonfires? How are we going to draw a bonfire, but also a kind of a springing up of the green that we see in this season? Wild puffing of emerald trees. How are we going to get this image of a tree that's sort of puffing with blossom? You might have a blossoming tree in your garden or somewhere on your road. How are we going to draw that picture? Flame-filled bushes. Do you remember I talked earlier about how these bushes aren't actually on fire, but the new leaves, the colours that's coming from them, and the way he's described that metaphor as being flame-filled bushes. And then the final one on my list, green fires lit on the soil of the earth. So again, think about that. How are we going to get a green fire? How are we going to make it look like spring and look like a fire at the same time? So it's about trying to draw those metaphors together. Once you've done your drawing, I want you to label your drawing with the quotation from the poem. Okay, so take that language and put it onto your drawing. Okay, and the final task is just a little bit of writing. So finally, to write a short paragraph explaining why you think the poet has used a fire metaphor to describe spring. This only has to be a couple of sentences. Obviously, if you can use quotations from the poem, fantastic. And at this stage, if you need to be reminded of the poem, you can just go back in the video and find when the poem's on the screen and pause that so you can have the poem in front of you. Again, if you need reminding of anything, you can go back through the video and listen to some of my ideas. Some of my ideas you might disagree with, you might have your own interpretation, which is fantastic. All I want you to do at this last stage is to really just give your own opinion. So why you think the poet has used a fire metaphor to describe spring. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed looking at that poem in quite a bit of detail. Let's see how we get on. Do the best you can. If you feel like this isn't really for you, don't worry too much about it. It's just a little extra thing. and depending on kind of the feedback and how we go, maybe I'll do another poem next week, maybe I'll do an extract from a novel, and we'll just start looking at things in a slightly different way and really start getting our minds thinking about different types of English literature. Okay, that's it from me for today. Enjoy yourselves, keep safe, be good, and I'll see you when I see you. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.